Hey there everyone, and welcome to Tabletop Toolbox. I am Jeff, and I'm looking a little shaggy here in this 77th episode of the weekly Ratchet. But if you think the hairs on my head are long, you should see the list of games I've got to talk about right here on the weekly Ratchet. Hey there, folks, and welcome back to the weekly Ratchet. Hope you've all had a fantastic week, hopefully getting to play some games with family and or friends. I have done quite a lot of that. But first, listen, I need a haircut. I know I need a haircut. I was going to get one last week, but then I had the idea for an intro to a video for a board game that I'm going to be working on here in the very near future. And in fact, I went ahead and I shot that this morning. I thought it was going to look nice with my just crazy hair, and I definitely pulled it off. Here's a little teaser for you to enjoy. On that note, you may have noticed there hasn't been a ton of content coming out here in the channel lately. I've taken a little break coming out of the Dice Tower retreat. I've also been playing a lot of No Man's Sky again. The new Corvette expansion is amazing, or add-on, whatever it is, DLC, upgrade, whatever the hell it is. It's just fantastic. I've been playing a lot with that. Also, I have played a ton of games this week. And so, want to let you know there will be more stuff starting to come out again. I've got a couple of previews and reviews and such I've got to get put together. I've been writing some scripts, so I'm getting ready for some new stuff coming out, and probably not soon enough because just subscriptions have been flatlined for the past 2 or 3 weeks. Just nothing has been going on. It's getting a little frustrating, but that's a topic for another day. I've played a lot of stuff. I have a ton of games to tell you about. Of course, kicking things off with a bit of new games. Now, we're at the end of the period. This is the last of the sort of phase I go through every year where all the games that I really liked at the Dice Tower Retreat have delivered. And so the first of those is the Pursuit of Happiness Big Box Edition. This does not store vertically very well, but it is it's also a big box that has a lot of dead space in this, although there are a ton of cards that come in this box. But anyways, I did get this along with the mat. I think I got an all-in version of it with just tons and tons of cards. I mean, tons of cards in this. And so I've actually already had a chance to play this edition of it. I'll tell you about that here in just a little bit. Up next, these aren't stacked correctly. I got in Gilded Realms. Talked about this one also in the retreat episode. Civilization game with kind of a fairly interesting engine building aspect to it. Some interesting resource management aspects of it, income phases, all that kind of stuff. And then there's a little bit of PvP play and a lot of PvE play, player versus environment, for folks who don't know, where you're kind of playing against the game. More so than necessarily against other players, although that is an option. I did get to play this solo this week, and so I'll chat about that here again in a little bit. A couple of other games have come in. First of all, let me mention this one. I just went ahead and bought this one on a complete whim. This is Blokus Duo, a two-player game, a two-player version of the game Blokus. This is by Mattel, of all folks. I really like Blokus. It is a very, very clean design, very, very thinky game, and I like playing it with my wife, but playing the 4-player version of it, you always have to have 4 players in that game. So if you're playing 3-player, the 3 of you have to kind of co-manage the 4th player, and then the 2-player game, you each have to play as 2 colors. This eliminates that problem, and it is a tight, tactical little game. Played this week. I'll chat about that one. Up next, a Kickstarter came in. This is I Made You a Mixtape. This was a gift courtesy of, Massive Asterix Games. My friends Dan Hughes and Mike Delisio, of course, did a preview video of this here in the channel, and so they sent me my complimentary copy, which is all I get for doing those videos, but that's perfectly fine. That's kind of what I want to get. So, anyways, yes, this is I Made You a Mixtape. Have not gotten a chance to play this one yet. Thought I might. Didn't. Tell you about that in a little bit. I'm saying a little bit a lot. Okay. Up next, we had a math trade over the weekend. I've talked about these before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, yes, I have them all. I had a math trade that was coming up this past weekend. Was kind of, somewhat focused on over the past couple of weeks. This is where You create a geek list on Board Game Geek of games that you're looking to get rid of. Other people, of course, do the same. And then you use this online wish list generator, which is some very, very odd, scripted, but really terrible user interface where you're deciding which games you want and which games you're willing to trade away for that game. But you're not necessarily making direct trades. The sort of software behind this wish list generator will kind of go and find a path. Okay, well, if you give this game to this person and they give a game to that person, they give a game to that person, then this person will give you the game that you're looking for. Like I said, terrible user interface. I had just a nightmare trying to work this thing. And we had over 1,700 games from here in the Richmond area and at least one person from New Jersey who were participating in this trade. So I got rid of Bonsai, one of my 2 copies of ISS Vanguard, the new Kraftwagen game, which just didn't land for me as well as the original V6 edition. I got rid of a deluxeified version of Maracaibo. Don't know why I had that game in the first place. I got rid of Fit to Print, the colossal cat in the box. I still have my kind of miniature original version. And I did get rid of the Petrichor Collector's Edition. So between Petrichor and ISS Vanguard, it was probably a good $500 worth of board games. I don't think I got $500 back, but that's kind of the way it goes. So I got in BOOoop. This is the Halloween edition of the game of BOOoop, where cats are sort of competing to climb onto a bed. In this case, it's back to the original theming of the original game, which was cats trying to sit on a bedspread. But in this game, there are little ghosts that sort of move across the lines in between this. I believe it's a 6x6 grid. And so you'll get these ghosts that kind of move across, and they can scare, I believe, even the larger kittens, which cannot typically be booped by at least the kittens. Anyways, I like BOOoop. I always kind of felt that this one was a bit of a cash grab. I would have really much rather seen a Puppies edition to the original game, like a little add-on, which I think would have easily worked for this theming. I'd always kind of told myself I was going to make it. I never did. And so when I saw this in the trade, I thought, what the heck, I'll just go ahead and trade for it. And now I have it, and I have all 3 editions of BOOoop. I also picked up Between Two Cities. This is from Stonemaier Games. I don't really know anything about it. So it's a little bit of a city builder, and I know that there's a negotiation aspect to it. I don't really know anything else about it, but I always do love a good city builder game. It looks like it's got kind of a tile placement, tile tableau building kind of a thing. So we'll see. I'm hoping I can check this one out before too long. And I should mention that all these came in just this past Saturday, so I've not had a chance to play any of these. The other one I picked up is Fog of Love. I don't even know who this is by. This is by... It doesn't say on the box at all. Designer is a Jacob Jaskov. I have no idea who the publisher is. But anyways, this is a... kind of it's another one of these life simulators. It's a 2-player only game where you're sort of... It's a semi-co-op nature game where you're trying to sort of play out the story of a relationship. You may have similar goals or competing goals. You've got to kind of try and figure out how to accomplish your stuff while still sort of maintaining the relationship, something like that. I don't know a ton about it, but I have kind of developed this recent love for these life simulator games. Of course, Pursuit of Happiness, the adulthood game. And so when I saw this up for trade, I thought, I've kind of heard about this. I've always kind of been curious about it. Also, of course, looking for 2-player games. And I thought, let's just check this one out. Fog of Love. No idea when I'll get to that one. It's probably going to be too big for the speakeasy that my wife and I go to, but we'll see how that kind of plays out. Another game here is Eila and Something Shiny. Now, this is by Ice Makes, and the designer is Jeffrey CCH. He does all the games for Ice Makes. He's also the designer of Terrorscape, Age of Civilization, Age of Galaxy, the Epics game, which is not quite out yet. I did a video of it on the channel here a while back. I've known of this one as well. It's a story-driven game. It is a basically 1+ player game, so you can, it's almost sort of designed for solo play, but it looks like there are some ways that you can play with extra people, but my guess is they're just kind of weighing in on that decision space, right? So, again, one I've kind of known about, haven't really been curious enough to go in and pick up a copy, but definitely something I was willing to trade for. Eila and Something Shiny. All right. Let me reach out of frame here 1 second. Do some rearranging. Okay. Whoa. Heavy. Weather Machine by Vital Lacerda. I'm not sure if I've ever talked about this game here on the channel, or on the Ratchet at least. I have played this a couple times. I've probably mentioned it on the Ratchet, but it has probably been a while. This is a sort of a very complex, I believe, something of a worker placement style game where you're trying to research this machine that affects the weather, and you're trying to build a better version of that machine because the current version sort of wreaks havoc as it makes those changes in the weather, if that makes any sense. You're trying to make a new and improved version of this weather machine that won't create disastrous weather events. And that's all in the text. That's all in sort of the rule book and the description. But the game doesn't really feel like any of that. This, to me, has always been one of the least thematic games from Vital Lacerda, but I did really enjoy this because it has this sort of a combo ability where you can basically take turns out of order if you're really clever about it. If you sort of stock up on some resources, you can trigger an entire extra action on your turn at just the right time. And you can do that to sort of shoot yourself ahead of your opponents when it comes to taking various goals or getting things done before they can. And so while the theme just completely left me just disinterested, the mechanism, the puzzle of the play was really a lot of fun to get into. So again, I saw this in the trade. It is an all-in sort of deluxe edition, has everything in it. Except for the Metal Gears. I don't think the Metal Gears are in there. But I went ahead and I took a chance to get this one. I think either it was ISS Vanguard or Petrichor that went for this game. Again, not sure if that was worth it. But alas, here it is. All right, next is Terracotta Army. This was another game that I have sort of known about. I've seen this cover many times. It looks very striking, looks very interesting. Actually realized today that it is a board and dice game, and I think folks kind of know where I stand with board and dice stuff. Obviously, this one and Weather Machine are still in shrink, but this is another worker placement game, and it does have, I guess, different types of workers. There is a little bit of an area control element to it, which isn't always my favorite thing. The components in here look to be very, very fancy. And then, of course, we've seen a lot of this sort of ancient China idea in a lot of games lately, and I've kind of taken a liking to them. So I am curious to check this one out, and we will see what comes of it. The last one, folks will know this one, Flamme Rouge. This is from Stronghold Games. I have talked about this before on the Ratchet. It's been a while since I played it, but it is the predecessor to the game of Heat, another racing game, but this time on bicycles. And it's got this really, really clever card playing mechanism and a drafting mechanism. The drafting was kind of scaled back in Heat, but it is far more important in Flamme Rouge as it lets you play sort of weaker cards to save your energy. Unlike Heat, your decks, your cards never cycle through. When you're out of cards, you're out of stamina and you just can't pedal anymore and you're out of the race. In Flamme Rouge, you've got to really be careful on how you're drafting, take advantage of, downhill grades and such to try and, again, last as long as you possibly can, maybe save your energy towards the end of the race to play those really big distance cards, get ahead of the pack, and hopefully win. I had a ton of fun playing this. This one has the Peloton expansion, and there are other expansions I will probably keep an eye out for. The only concern I have with this is it's probably just not very good at 2, which is unfortunate because it's going to make it difficult for me to get it played. But I really, really like this a lot more than I have ever enjoyed a game of Heat. Just my opinion, but that is Flamme Rouge. And the last one, and I almost forgot about this one. Someone just literally handed me this after the math trade. This is Ramen Fury, a sort of a Sushi Go-esque card drafting game based on ramen. And it was funny because the morning that someone handed me this was the morning after we had a big homemade ramen dish over the weekend. My daughter's just favorite meal that I prepare. And so someone says, anybody want this? My daughter and I were like, oh, yes, we will take that. Sure, thank you. Don't mind if we do. Don't know anything about it. Just that it's kind of like Sushi Go. That is Ramen Fury. Okay. That was a lot of games to get through. Now let's chat about your answers to Question of the Week. All right, last week I asked you to tell me about a particular rule or a mechanism of a board game, something that you possibly played recently that really stood out to you. Now, all of these answers came back as positive things, which is totally fine. I actually have something a little more on the negative side in mind, but I'll get to that one obviously here at the end of this section. So up first was Rentless, who mentioned Netta Tanka, which uses a worker placement mechanism where placing your workers next to one of your other workers provides an extra bonus. I can't say that I've seen a system like that. That sounds kind of interesting. Also, I have not heard about this game at all, but I do love a good worker placement game. Might have to put that one on my watch list. Up next was Brandon Graham, who brought up the Blink ability in one of the expansions to Anachrony, allowing you to relocate one of your already placed workers to another location to take that action, which could actually benefit an opponent by freeing up a space they needed to visit themselves. I do love another worker placement game, and I've seen other games that kind of do that. Sometimes it's an action card or a special, maybe a one-time use thing that you can fire off to let you do just that. In fact, we've seen that in Everdell now, and I'm trying to think of some other games that we've possibly seen that in. I almost want to say that I saw that in Brink. In fact, when I saw Blink, I thought that's what you were talking about at first, but the Brink game from Ivy Studios, I think there was a rare ability where you could do the same thing, kind of jump somewhere else and basically get an extra action out of a worker. Always a fun thing to do in a worker placement game. Wonder Flonium mentioned Noosefjord, where players are dealt building cards, which, if not built within a few rounds, become publicly available for other players to build instead. Ah, yes, the good old if you don't, someone else will mechanism. I've seen that in a couple of games. I can't think of one off the top of my head, not in a construction game like this necessarily, but, sort of those games where, okay, you get a couple of cards, and if you don't use them quick enough, maybe you're going to, it may just kind of be an automatic thing. Okay, pick the ones you want to keep. Actually, Gilded Realms kind of does something like that, in that you take some cards, you build what you can, the rest that you don't build goes in a not public, but in a visible area on your player board, and players can potentially steal them from you if they win an attack against you. That's sort of the PvP element of Gilded Realms. But yeah, that definitely adds a little tension to a game for sure. Cheshire talked about exploring an alternative benefit to a resource cost in Princess Bride Adventure Book, allowing for more powerful cards to cycle through the story card deck. And he was mentioning where you can use that resource to do something else, kind of just get some extra cards in your hand, but they've sort of leaned into a new mechanism that lets you draft these additional cards, these more unique special cards, and add them into that deck, and maybe they cycle through and give you some extra stuff to explore. That sounded kind of interesting. I don't know anything about Princess Bride. Never saw the movie, never played the game. Isn't there a book as well? I don't know. Never read it. Clueless on Princess Bride. Troy Herring mentioned Boza, specifically the mechanism by which players are dealt multiple endgame scoring cards, which instead of choosing which to keep at the beginning of the game, they're allowed to make that decision at the end of the game. Now, I've seen a couple games recently that have been doing this. In fact, I've seen that a little bit more, where you kind of get to wait until the end of the game to decide, okay, which one of these is going to work best for me. Now, where I thought you were going with this, when I first started reading the comment, was the game Maglev Metro, which also gives you 4 endgame scoring cards, but by default, you can only score one of them. You will get to pick. But if you want to score more of them, you have to unlock that ability throughout the game. You have to, you're picking up passengers and dropping them off in Maglev Metro. It's a pick up and deliver game, kind of a, a train company, subway, whatever type of a idea. And as you're dropping off those passengers, hilariously, they kind of become imprisoned on your player board and unlock abilities to improve your Metro line. You can have more cars, you can pick up more people, drop off more people, move further, add track, all that kind of stuff. And you can unlock the ability to score more of those endgame scoring cards. I kind of thought you were going in that direction when I first saw that. So those are the answers that we've had. As I mentioned, the one that I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned last week that when this local gentleman who I met recently, who we had very, very different gaming tastes, and he was asking me, what's something that you really, he asked me what's something you really like about a particular board game, and I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head. But as I got to thinking about it, it's kind of stayed in my mind, and I thought of something in games that I don't like, a particular system, and it's not actually a particular system, I should say. It is a reaction that you get from players in the game. And one example of it, it's not the one that I initially thought of, but one that I definitely thought of was Twilight Imperium. And I think Brink can do this as well. And I was also chatting with my friend over the weekend about Moonrakers. Moonrakers is also a game where this kind of tends to happen. And that is that a player makes a move, they do something, maybe they score some points, whatever, and everyone kind of around the table says, all right, we need to make sure that this person doesn't win. We need to stop this person. We need to all work together and make this person lose this game. And I really, really don't like games that create that. And I don't like games, especially that let it happen, like the few that I have mentioned, where you can just effectively, you can accomplish this if you all sort of work towards it, and just making sure that someone is going to have a miserable playthrough and has no chance of winning the game. I hate it when games let you pull that off. So that is one that has sort of stood out to me as I was thinking about this whole topic in the past week. That is it for Question of the Week. Let me tell you about all of these games I've played lately. All right, this next segment is almost going to be as long as the retreat clips, although a couple of the games I'm going to talk about I've already mentioned, so I'll kind of gloss over them. But I have played a lot of games in this past week. In fact, I've noticed, ever since I started keeping logs on Board Game Geek, I've played 53 games this month. My record is 56 games last August, which was when the Dice Tower Retreat was. So I'm on track to beat that record, and I'm wondering if I can get to 60 and average 2 games a day this month. We shall see. I got one more week left to do it. Anyways, the first game that we played last week, I think this was Monday or Tuesday, sat down with my wife and daughter. We played a game of Ink. I talked about this one at the Dice Tower Retreat, first one that we played while we were there. And this is a tableau building game where you're simply trying to score for these colored tiles that you're placing out into your own tableau. The drafting system is very simple, except for that as you draft these tiles, you're possibly going to be putting a lot of blocker tiles out, which can take away scoring opportunities from you depending on how you have to put them out. They're kind of randomized. And you've got a card in front of you of 2 of the 5 colors that are in this game. You're going to have 12 these little ink bottles that you're seeing in these pictures. You're going to have to put those 12 ink bottles into scoring, sort of requirements of those specific colors, and then the other 12 bottles that you have are wild, and they can be used for any of the 5 colors. And that's really it. The gameplay here is very simplistic, but there is a decent amount of puzzling through, maybe you want to try and expand a certain colored area because you see a lot of opportunities to put out ink bottles in that area. But if you wait too long, as I did in this playthrough, and expand just one area too long, too much, then you may find yourself way behind your opponents in terms of scoring. And that's what happened to me here. Our daughter actually did very well with this game. She was just waiting for one tile to come out. By the time she got it, my wife has sort of caught up to her as far as having very few ink bottles left. The whole idea is there's no score. You're just racing to use up all of your ink bottles, 24 of them to be precise, as soon as you possibly can. And if you do run out, but have the opportunity to score more of them, then you're going to use these black ink bottles. And on my wife's last turn, she got 1 black ink bottle out. My daughter had none. And so my wife actually won the game. I think I had 12 or so bottles left to go. I was nowhere near winning this game. My wife really liked it. Daughter was somewhat kind of indifferent because I think it is so abstract and just kind of non-thematic that she just didn't really get excited about it. But my wife did like it. We might try this out 2-player, at the speakeasy events that we like to go to. But anyways, that is Ink by Casper Lapp, a very cute but abstract little puzzle game. Up next, as I mentioned, I played Gilded Realms solo. This is I would not say that it's a very heavy game. It's not a very, very complicated game, but there are a lot of different options available to you within reason. And I wanted to try this out. I really, really like the system. I really, really like what the game does. This idea that you're trying to build up this sort of a kingdom of yours. You're trying to sort of upgrade and that's your castle. There's not really a castle idea to this, but you're trying to improve these 5 cards that represent your kingdom. As you improve them, you get various abilities off of them. You get various resources from them, especially your military card. As you beef that up, you then have more opportunities to sort of defend your village, your kingdom. As you're developing these other tiles, you're maybe getting extra resources from them. The way that you develop them can be a little iffy as far as what you're really able to pull off, because you're getting these cards. The cards kind of have to go into this build query of yours. Every round they fall at least one space. You can speed them up if you need to. As they then come out of that build query and sort of just line up in your tableau, you're then able to spend them to flip over these cards and upgrade your kingdom. And that's really neat. I like it. What was iffy with this is that there's a timeline. There's sort of you play either 9 or 12 rounds. Each round represents a year. And each year, an event is going to trigger that you may not really have any insight to. You don't know what's going to happen. There's no pre-planning. We see a lot of games where, okay, this event is going to happen, but you're going to get a round or two to kind of prepare yourself for it. Not this one. This one is surprise. Hope you're ready. And that can be difficult. But I wanted to check this out solo. I knew that in the solo play I was going to have to be a little bit more militant than I had to be in the competitive play. There is this idea that as those events trigger, as those sort of attacks and such from this invisible, neutral, sort of made up enemy of you and all of your kingdoms, each of the players' kingdoms, as that sort of invisible opponent attacks you, you have to either defend yourself against it. They may become more powerful if you don't do anything. They're going to get these ongoing threats that are going to come out, and they're going to worsen the actual attack when you get attacked. But you have the ability in those rounds to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and take out this enemy, and that's going to, if I win, that's going to weaken them in a subsequent attack against me or my opponents if you're playing the multiplayer game. So I had to lean into the military a bit more for this, which didn't really go well for me. I will simply say that there's a little bit of dice chucking in this. Basically, in every one of the attacks, you're going to roll a number of dice from that invisible enemy. Whenever you go to attack or possibly defend, you may roll at least 2 dice. You're going to typically roll 2 dice to sort of establish your defense level. And I just had terrible rolls throughout this entire game. I would roll for the enemy using the same dice that I might use, and they would get 7 hits against me. I would then roll those same dice against them and get 3 hits in return. And so I just was constantly under the gun of these just dice that were having it out for me really badly. And that was kind of frustrating, because that can definitely swing the game for or against you, just depending on how the dice roll. I'll also say that rules-wise, there are 2 different ways to attack, and at least 2, if not 3 different ways to resolve defenses, especially in the solo game. Sometimes when you get attacked by aspects of the game, you have to kind of add up all these different threat levels, which can come from the board. The threats get stronger and stronger each year. The residual threats that may stay out there, as I kind of mentioned, you may get these looming threats that stay out until you deal with them. If any of your population have been essentially taken out, either from conflict or from overbuilding your own kingdom, you can kind of create your own threat by having those population units knocked out. You can have various, if you become a very strong trading partner, again, with kind of invisible opponents or sort of NPCs, I guess, if you will. But if you become very lucrative in that aspect of the game, you can also gain some additional threat. There's a lot of different ways you can get threat in this game, and that's what you have to resolve when you get attacked. But in the solo game, there is an additional way that you can get attacked by these cards, and I actually did not realize it until halfway through the game that I was resolving them incorrectly. It's a different style of attack, and so you have to resolve it differently. You have to resolve your defense differently, and that's just not clearly laid out in this rulebook. It's very confusing what the game wants you to do and how, and I wish that there was just more consistency in how you dealt with combat in this game. I kind of wish it was the same no matter how it triggered, or it was at least very clear that, okay, this is this is maybe a war and this is an attack. I don't know. But it made it a little difficult to get through. I got clobbered in this. I did get to the penultimate round of an epic game, but I really felt like I was kind of making the wrong decisions early on. I kind of felt like I was, sort of working my kingdom in one direction, and I wasn't able to focus on other areas, and that made it difficult for me to get resources going, made it difficult for me to generate an income in this game. And I don't know if I actually did things wrong, or again, if the dice just kind of hurt me so badly that it didn't really matter what I was doing. Not sure. Hoping I can actually get this played again this week with a game event with some local buddies. We shall see. I still like the game. I like the production of it, especially Gilded Realms. All right, so on Thursday this past week, I had a couple friends come over, and we played Lost Ruins of Arnak. We played the big box edition of this game. I don't have this. My buddy Daniel came over, and he brought it with him. It's something he wanted to check out recently. I've played Lost Ruins of Arnak a couple of times. In fact, the first time was 4 years ago at the first Ice Tower retreat that I went to in 2021. In fact, I think it was like the second or third game I played that entire week. And I even noted then that it was neat. I was kind of, intrigued by it, but it didn't do anything that really seemed to stand out at me. And it's funny because as I have played it over the years, I've played this game. This is my fourth playthrough of Arnak. Obviously, the first time with all these current expansions. I don't think I started using any of the expansions until my previous playthrough, which was in May of 2022. And every time that I've played it, I have certainly started to understand more of what that game is trying to get you to do. Essentially, Arnak, for folks who may not know, Arnak is a fairly abstract kind of a exploration, almost like an Indiana Jones type of game. And the board is divided into two distinct areas. On the left side of the board, you've got these expeditions that you can go on. You have sort of nearby locations, distant locations, and then very distant locations. And as you're going to these places, you're going to have to either travel by foot or by car or by boat or by plane. And there's this kind of tier in how you can, you can use, for example, a boat to take a trip that would require foot. It just kind of gets there quicker, I guess. And when you go to an expedition, you're going to get some resources. You're going to put down a tile of what you actually discover at that location. You don't know what you're going to get before you do that, so you may grab some additional resources from that. And then a monster tile will come out and sit on top of that location. And then it will also show resources, but those are actually a cost to kind of vanquish the monster. If you manage to vanquish it, you're going to take that tile. You can use it later for some a unique, usually a one-time benefit. And all that, again, is you're just gaining and spending resources over on that side of the board. On the other side of the board is this, there's a name for it. I can't remember what it is, but it's sort of an exploration track or expedition track, something like that. And it's sort of the same idea. You're spending resources often to get resources, usually at a ratio that doesn't work in your favor. But you got two tokens over there. You have a magnifying glass. You have a little log journal. Your magnifying glass always has to be at the same level or ahead of your journal. This sort of idea that you have to see things before we can write about it. But again, that's it for that theming, right? It's just, you're just moving these tokens up this track. That track is arranged into rows. Each row has a cost to move up. But it also sort of forks and converges and branches into different ways. So you may go one route with one of your tokens and another route with one of the other tokens, and you're spending resources every time you advance on one of those rows. But then each of those rows has a benefit unique to the type of token. So if you go to a row with your magnifying glass and then later with your journal, you're going to get typically two different rewards. And I have never understood that track. I have never done well with that track. And I'll tell you that the first time I ever played this, I looked at, okay, I need a gem, which is the most rare resource in the game. I need a gem to get up to that next level. Over here, I can put a worker down to spend a coin and get a gem. Okay, so I'm going to put a worker down. I'm going to spend a coin. I get my gem. And my next turn, I use my gem to go up that track. Boom, I did that thing. And then later on, okay, I see that I want to go up this other track, or maybe I want to go over and do this expedition. I need a couple of compasses. It's sort of a deck building game. You're going to have a hand of cards. I may play a couple cards to get those compasses, and then I place a worker on that expedition. I get a couple of resources. Maybe I have just enough resources to then spend to sort of vanquish that monster, and I'm out. I've used my two workers. I've played what few cards I have in my hand. I have nothing left in front of me, and I had to pass for the round and watch everyone else take turn after turn after turn after turn, and I don't understand what the hell they're doing. However, in my last two plays of this, including this past week, clearly, I have I've just grown as a gamer, and I kind of understand now, okay, this is about resource efficiency, it's about action efficiency. Yes, I can place that work there and get that gem and move up that track, and that's it. 2 turns using up, two of a very small number of actions that you kind of have baked into your round to make 1 advancement on a track. That's all I have to show for my efforts. But if maybe instead I go on this expedition and I, get a couple resources from there. I use that resource to move my other token up a space on a track. It gives me a couple little things. Maybe it lets me flip over an assistant. An assistant is this once per round token that you can sort of tap to give yourself something. And maybe that gives me a movement, an airplane icon. I then use that airplane icon to place another worker out, claiming another expedition, getting me a bunch more resources. I get a little token. I can then use that token on my player board to trigger a action that's going to give me that gem. I use that gem to move up that next track, but now I have all these extra resources. I can move up that track again. Now I've gotten 2 additional resources from that. I'm going to use that to maybe buy a card, maybe play it for some powerful effect, etc., etc. And all of a sudden I've taken 6, 7, 8 turns and I've moved all this stuff around, but it is ultimately just, it's an ins and out game, right? So I'm spending these resources to get this stuff. I'm spending it to get more stuff. And I'm just trying to stay as net positive as I can in every one of those transactions so I can still just keep pushing forward with everything that I'm sort of setting out to do. I've also realized more and more and more that the emphasis of the game is that track. Yes, there are points to get on this side of the board, especially when you go and you claim those monsters. You get a lot of stuff from there. Yes, it can help you get the resources, but a lot of that's going to be spent over here getting up that track because there's just a ton of endgame score there. In this expansion are more of these leaders. Leaders were introduced, I think, in the first expansion to Arnak, and that gives you some asymmetrical play. I had a particular character in this game. She was the mechanic. I loved just the artwork on the back of the board and such. And I had this big gear, and I could rotate this gear throughout the game to generate some extra resources, to generate sort of just extra stuff, maybe movement actions or whatever, the ability to go on those different expeditions. And I had these gold teeth that I could add to that gear throughout the game. Usually just based on the timer. In certain rounds, I was going to get another gold component to put in that gear. And as I was kind of reading the rules to it and kind of figuring, okay, how's this character work? And I thought, I'm not going to get to spin that gear very much. I'm not really going to be able to rely on that very often. I was completely wrong with that. I bought a bunch of cards. I had a good number of cards that let me draw more cards, which is a very key aspect of Arnak. And one of the guys who came over and played with us, I've mentioned him in the past. His name is Eric. He's a very, very, very smart gamer. I played Great Western Trail New Zealand with him a year or so back, and he just mopped the floor with us. And so I knew he was coming. I kind of made a general post to see if people wanted to come out and play Arnak. And he said, yeah, he'd like to come over. And I thought, oh, man, okay, well, I'm going to get clobbered in this game, going to do my best. And I could not believe that I clinched the win at the end of this game. I was really, really very surprised. It's one of those games where you're always going to feel under pressure. You're always going to feel like I'm not going to have what I need to climb up that rank, or I'm 1 gold shy to be able to do something I'm trying to do. But again, the more you sit there and you kind of work your way through a path of actions that you can take to get the things that you want to take, you might just find a way to pull it off. And actually, I found myself at the end of the game flush with a couple of resources that I did not need. There was nothing I could do with them, except for I was spending them to just buy cards. Some of them triggered some extra abilities, gave me a couple more resources. I had already actually pegged the track with both of my tokens in that expedition track. I'd grabbed some extra endgame scoring tiles. Like I said, I was adding some extra cards to my deck, which are just points at the end of the game. And came out with just shy of 100 points with Lost Ruins of Arnak. The game still just kind of falls short for me because of the theme. Yes, the art-wise, it's all there, but you don't feel like you're exploring. You don't feel like you're going on these epic expeditions and finding all this stuff. You're just getting the same 4 or 5 resources, I guess 6 resources, gold and compasses, tablets, arrowheads, and gems. I think it's only 5. But there is this extra there's a black tablet in this game that you can collect at a couple of spots. And there's this idea that, and I can't remember what they're called, but there's two different types of cards that you can buy. One of them is just a card that you buy with gold. They kind of go into your hand, they cycle through, and you know, when you get them drawn later, you get to play them. And there's an extra type of card that has a blue background. It has an extra resource cost to it. And when you buy those, they immediately activate. They then go back in through your deck. And when they come up again, you actually have to pay an additional resource to play them again. And they're hard to get. They're very hard to get because that same resource you're using to buy them, these little compass tokens, are what you're often going to use on your expeditions. And they're hard to come. It's not very hard to come by, but you're not going to have tons of them sitting around. And so you're always kind of torn between, do I use those to go and explore and get resources to feed that track over here? Or do I use them to buy this card, which they may give you some powerful abilities, but they may not quite flush you with resources that you would need to advance on that track. But in this expansion, those cards can actually come down and slot into that expedition track. And as long as you're above any particular slot on that track, you can actually spend one of these black tablet tiles to trigger that card as if it was in your hand. And it triggers as if you had it in your hand. You get to do whatever it lets you do. You can then trigger it multiple times as long as you have those black tokens. However, those tokens actually come from slots on the main board, and as more of them are collected and used by players, it increases the negative scoring value of every one of those tablets that has been slotted underneath those cards. So the one particular card was letting me reactivate something. I can't actually remember what it did, but it gave me a fairly powerful ability that I was really, really kind of helpful for my particular character. I think it reset one of my workers or something like that. And so I kind of kept using it, but at the end of the game, that actually cost me something like 8 points because I had played so many tokens to it. And so there's that kind of push and pull, right? I'm sure that those actions gave me more than 8 points throughout the game. I just kind of had to suffer that little bit of consequence at the end. Like I said, though, it did still come out on the top with this one. So I was pleasantly surprised with that playthrough of Lost Ruins of Arnak. Like I said, it's not a game that I've ever really disliked. It's just not a game that's ever really jumped out at me. Oh my gosh, can't wait to play this again, because it is still sort of just a pasted on theme. Lost Ruins of Arnak. All right. After that play, Eric had to leave, and my wife came over and joined us. Daniel and I and my wife played another quick game of Dicey Devices. I've talked about this one, I think, just in the past episode. This is a Kickstarter prototype. Back of the box, big letters, prototype. This is, as I kind of mentioned, it is a racing game. We were simply trying to, or I should say a race game, a game where you are racing, to be the last scientist standing. You're trying to zap your opponents with a death ray by putting these cards into your tableau. If you have a certain number of sets of cards, you're going to activate your death ray. You're going to get to fire it based on how many sets you have, and each shot that you get to take is strengthened by having more shots available. You're getting these cards in your tableau by sort of playing this little area control element on this scrapyard tile, and then you're placing the robots out there. And again, as I mentioned last week, all this kind of plays in reverse. So you're putting out robots to get the cards, possibly activating those cards for special effects, but then also activating your laser to shoot at people. And if you've gotten shot at, you have to revive yourself by rolling doubles or paying scrap, which is the one resource in the game. But you play it entirely in reverse of how I just explained it. So it makes the teach of this game a little trickier than what I think it needs to be. But I can understand that the reason they did that was to sort of double down on that chaos, because especially after you've drafted those cards away from the scrapyard based on that little area control mechanism, you're then going to deploy more robots out there on your turn to sort of start working on area control for the next round. But you haven't even replenished the cards out there that may have been taken in this round. So you're putting robots out there without even knowing what you're going for, potentially, if there aren't cards in that slot of this hexagonal central board. And so I've had a couple of chats with a member of the team of whatever company this is, Origami Whale. And they have emphasized, as is kind of clearly evident from the nature of this game, that it is about random chaos. They are about sort of embracing that randomness. And I think that's fine. It's not for me necessarily, but I can see what the game is trying to do. I do still think that it's just too complicated of a teach for what the game really gives you. I hope they can kind of find some ways to streamline the rules a little bit. I think there's just kind of more stuff in here than there needs to be for what the game does, but I love the production. I love this art style. I love the components that are in this thing, and I can see it being successful with the right crowd as long as they can get through those rules. I kind of see this as a younger crowd game, if you will. But it's not as... It's almost as chaotic as Thunder Road Vendetta, almost, but a lot more rulesy than Thunder Road Vendetta. And so again, I don't think that what they're trying to do with the game really quite justifies what it takes you to get into a playthrough of Dicey Devices. I'll be working on a video on that here on the channel here in probably just the next few weeks, so that will probably be out before too long. Up next, I think Friday night, my wife and I were just kind of relaxing a little bit. We played a couple games of Blokus Duo. This game can be intense, really. In fact, I as I was playing this, I was thinking about the, what's it called? The Patterns game that I've talked about a couple of times. Those sort of two-player, very, very tight tactical games where you kind of have your own plan of what you're trying to do, but then you're also having to react to your partner and what they're doing. You got to try and make sure you're not getting blocked. In our second playthrough this, actually, my wife stymied me quite well. The whole idea with this is you're simply putting out these little colored plastic pieces. As you're expanding across this little board, your pieces that you play have to touch the corner of any piece that you currently have in play. So it's similar to 10 penny parks, as I've mentioned in the past, except for that in 10 penny parks, you can just put a tile anywhere. Here you have to expand off of existing tiles, but they can only touch in a corner. They can never share a side with any of your own pieces. And so at one point I kind of had this corridor on the one side of the board, and I was starting to place some pieces along there, and then my wife stuck a piece out there legally, played it, and just completely blocked off my path. There was no way I could put any more tiles over there in that corner. And I'm kind of sitting there going, oh crap, because I suddenly realized I only had two other tiles that were really available to me to expand on, and if I lost either of those, I was really going to be in trouble. As far as, trying to continue putting pieces on the board. The two-player game in this, it's a tight play space. As I was looking at it, I thought, this looks like it should be pretty easy. But if both of you are not being very mindful about trying to really play tight, what I was actually trying to do was, as my wife would put down a piece, I would try to find a way that I could put a piece that would just tuck up very nicely against it. I made a couple of jokes about spooning each other's pieces with this, but my wife wasn't really gathering that. She didn't really have that in mind. And so I'd put out a piece, and then she would just kind of, just leave this huge gap next to it or in between our pieces that nothing could get placed in. And then you're kind of sitting there going, well, now that is like 4 or 5 little squares on this board that we can't use. You've only got so many spare tiles, spare spaces that you can live without before you're going to be sitting there with pieces that you simply cannot play. And at the end of the game, each of these pieces is made up of multiple squares. You're going to count the number of squares of all the pieces that you did not play, and that is your negative score. The only thing I'll say with this is that that's all fine. And if you're both ending the game with pieces left over, okay, I have negative 15, you have negative 14. Oh man, I just barely got you. If you manage to get all your pieces out, you get 15 points, maybe 20 points. I don't quite recall. I think it's 20. And if the last piece that you put out is your little 1x1 square, you get a bonus 5 points. And that is the weirdest convoluted scoring system I've ever seen, because it really should just be 0 points if you get all your tokens out, and maybe a 5-point bonus if you do get, your little square out, which even then, it doesn't need to be 5, because if one player gets all their pieces out and the other person has a piece left over, by default, they will lose the game. So having the bonus points is unnecessary. And if you both manage to get all of your pieces out and you both manage to put that one piece out last, A, you're both very good at this game. B, you're tied. And I don't know of any tiebreaker beyond that bonus. So the scoring is just kind of weird. It almost works best if you're both a little behind, if you're both, not able to get all your pieces out. I don't know. It's just a weird scoring system on what is otherwise a very solid, very tactical, and even a little bit cutthroat two-player game. That was Blokus Duo. Okay. So I mentioned the math trade. We did the math trade over the weekend. We had 55 people crammed into half of the relatively small Unplugged Gaming Cafe down in Midlothian, Virginia. Very, very nice place. I know some of the staff and the owners there, and just a great place. I'm really, really glad that they're doing well, and they've been around now for a couple of years. But as soon as that kind of cleared out, and boy, were we anxious for that to clear out, my wife and daughter and I stuck around, and we played a couple of games. The first game that I grabbed off the shelf, I couldn't believe they had it there. I've been wanting to check this out for quite a while, is Bloomchasers. Bloomchasers is a 3D sort of dexterity, again, puzzle placement kind of a game. You've got this brown tree trunk with a couple little branches that come off and then they just end. And then you're going to have these little plastic green branches, and they have little pegs that plop down into the branches of that brown tree. And what I did not know, because I've seen pictures of this came through Kickstarter, I almost backed it, I decided not to. So I didn't really know how it worked, but as you put those branches in, those little pegs are actually grooved in just the right way, so that as the branches come in, they kind of lock, and they lock into this perfect hexagonal grid. And so as you're putting out these tree branches, you're going to start to form this multi-level, three-dimensional, hexagonal, cuboid space. I don't know how to describe it. Then you're going to have 3 cards that are always going to be visible. The first thing you do on your turn is you're going to put out the third card, because there will always be one card missing. You're going to put out a card, you're going to draw a branch, you're going to put it anywhere in the tree that you want, and then you're going to choose one of the cards that are visible. And one of them is going to say put a bud, a little flower bud, onto the branch that you just placed. The other one card's going to say put a bud next to one of your existing buds already on the tree, and the other one says to put a bud on a branch adjacent to an opponent's bud. And those are your 3 options. That's it. You're going to put out those buds, and then eventually someone's going to pull out a bloom card. When the bloom card comes out, you're going to look to see, of all the buds that you have out here on this tree, if you have any patterns that let you play a flower. And there are 3 patterns. There was a sort of a triangular. Each one's going to use 3 buds. So you've got a triangle, so you got 3 buds in a triangular arrangement. You've got another flower which has 3 buds in a straight line, and that makes a flower. And then you have, and I believe it was the wind flower, which was a weird one. In fact, we had to start this game over again because I just didn't understand it the first time I read the rules. And the wind flower has 2 buds on one level and another bud beneath one of those other 2 buds. So you start to have 3 buds in play, but it actually has to be a 3D arrangement, kind of like an inverted L, I guess. And then the one side of that wind flower has a long peg that will go down through 2 branches of the tree. And at the end of the game, you're then going to find out how many cards of those 3 types. You had sun, wind, and rain. And you're going to have, I don't remember how many cards it was, but you're going to have, I think, 12 cards in the entire game. And 6 of them get taken out during setup. And so you don't know how many of each card are actually in the game. But based on the rarity of the card is how much its corresponding flower is worth. So if you had 3 of the same card, they're worth 3 points apiece. But if you had 2 of a card, well, then they're worth maybe 3 or 4 points apiece. I can't remember what I just said. And if you only had 1 of a certain flower of that card, the rain card, then the rain flower will be worth like 5 points. It's worth a lot of extra points. And the other thing with this real quick is that I mentioned you have to have 3 buds in these arrangements, but one of them, don't have to be yours. So if you have 2 of a bud in that particular configuration and one of the buds is one of your opponents, well, then you can steal and you can still place your flower there, and you're basically, using one of your opponent's buds, sort of stealing it from them to build your flower, which I swear kept happening to me constantly. My wife kept taking one of my arrangements and I had something just right. She would then take one of those buds from me and now I had nothing, which was a little frustrating after like the third or fourth time. This was a neat game. I liked the 3D element of it. It's a very, very pretty game, as you're probably seeing from these pictures. But the gameplay really kind of felt a little flat. For one thing, with there being so few cards in this deck, I think, like I said, you only have about 12 cards that you're using. 3 of them are always on the table. So there's only 9 in the deck, if even that many. I think it's 9. And then you had 2 of the Bloom cards. And so we would often have rounds where a player would draw a Bloom card. Okay, you go around the table and you see if you can put any flowers out. If you cannot play any flowers, you get to put 1 bud on the tree anywhere that you want it to go. Okay, we do all that. Then the player, it's still their turn. So they draw another card and it's another Bloom card. And so they gotta sit there and do all that again. Now, hopefully you've now got a flower that you can place. But most likely someone stole something from you in the previous round. Maybe they even get another flower out and you just kind of, again, you feel like you're getting left behind. The other thing was that the 3D element of this was really, really cool. I really liked how you could start to build up these higher tiers, but it was very, very difficult to kind of see in this 3D environment where these bud configurations could even go, because especially as a branch came out of an existing branch, it then blocked off that space to ever grow another flower on. And so eventually you had to start going vertical. You had to start building the next level, but then you were taking out locations to build flowers on, maybe even sort of robbing yourself of potential opportunities going forward. And then lastly, as we were playing this, and I was sort of mindful of just that, I was trying to literally look in at our original base level to see, is there anywhere in there that I can put some flowers? And there was. And because I had to be that guy, I managed to get 2 of a 3 bud arrangement. My daughter put one in there as well, and I managed to steal that bud from her. But getting those buds and that actual flower arrangement into that level, there was only less than an inch, I would say, maybe 3/4 of an inch of space between the 2 tiers of this 3D tree. And so we actually had to partially disassemble the tree, put the flower in there that I was going towards, and then try to make sure we put the tree back the way that it was, which worked. We did it, and it was kind of funny. We were sort of joking about this unintentional dexterity element to this game. Very, very pretty game. Very, very simple rules. There is apparently a Birds and Bees expansion that they did not have, so we didn't get to play. Based on a quick cursory reading up of what that game has, I don't really see anything there that would drastically change the way the game plays. I'm really glad, I'm really glad I got to check this one out, but I'm also quite glad that I didn't back it, because I think, as we see a lot, it was still a little bit more gimmick than it really was game, but it was a fun thing to get to play with my family. While we were sitting there playing Bloomchasers, a table behind me was setting up for Wandering Towers, and they played that game in the time that we were playing Bloomchasers. We had to reset Bloomchasers when I realized I was getting the wind flowers wrong. And so they got done with Wandering Towers before we got done with Bloomchasers. We ordered some lunch, had some lunch there at Unplugged, and then I went ahead and I grabbed Wandering Towers off the table. I haven't played this since the Dice Tower Retreat last year, and it is another random chaos game, kind of up there with Dicey Devices. But it's kind of a little funnier. And while there isn't really much in the way of a theme here, there isn't really much of a theme to the game itself, but there's just enough that it does make it kind of humorous. Now, real quick, Wandering Towers is all about getting all of your wizards into a particular tower. You've got these cardboard towers in the base game. I think there's 9 of them in just these sort of generic kind of golden brick color. And then there's one large black tower called Raven's Keep. And you're going to line these things up on this circular board, and you're going to arrange your wizards on top of these towers. And then on your turn, you're going to have 3 little cards in your hand. You're going to pick 2 of them to play, one at a time. And those cards are either going to let you move a tower, or they're going to let you move one of your wizards. And that's it. Now, the towers are hollow. The golden ones are hollow on the underside. Raven's Keep is hollow on the top. And the whole idea is you're trying to get all 5 of your wizards into Raven's Keep. That's it. You also have these little potion tokens in front of you. I'm not sure if I got a picture of these, but you have little just cardboard tokens. On one side of them shows empty, and the other side will show it filled with your player color. The way that you fill your potions is that you have to place a tower on top of one or more wizards of any player color, including your own, which I immediately took to calling juicing the wizards. And so I would, every single time without fail, because I am this kind of person, I would pick up a tower, I go 1, 2, 3, and I would place it on a pile of wizards, and I'd make this kind of a juicing noise, and I would flip over one of my potion tokens. And my daughter kind of giggled every time. I think my wife was getting annoyed, to the surprise of no one. I understand. But as you fill those potions, you can then use them to trigger some magical abilities. You have always 2 magic powers in play. You can play as many as you want. And so we had one that lets you do a backwards movement of one of your wizards, 1 space. You could do a forward movement of one of your wizards, 1 or 2 spaces. I think just 1. And then you can also spend a potion to move any tower 2 spaces. And you would use these to lock in a pinch effect. If you were just 1 spot away from doing something, you could possibly use these potions to help get one of your wizards into the keep. And that's it. To win the game, all of your wizards have to be in the keep, and you must have filled all of your potions. You don't have to necessarily use them, but you have to have filled them. And that's the whole game. And so it's just this random chaos of moving your wizards around, moving these towers around. It also kind of acts like a memory game. So you can get your wizards underneath 1 or more towers. And if you're not keeping track of them, you can lose where they are, especially if they kind of get locked into the middle of a stack of towers. And then someone moves that entire stack around the board. You kind of go, well, I think I'm in there, but I don't remember which level I'm at, because it becomes really, really difficult to follow. The key to this game is act quickly. Get some wizards into that Raven's Keep as quickly as you possibly can. Start juicing wizards as quickly as you possibly can to give yourself some of that edge. I very quickly got 2 or 3 of my wizards tucked away into the tower, and then it was very easy for me to keep track of the other 2. I was also a little concerned because my daughter, she fell way behind in this fairly quickly. Both my wife and I got our potions filled, and again, 2 or 3 of our wizards into that keep quite quickly. My daughter got 2 of her wizards put away, but had not flipped over any of her potion tokens. But very, very quickly, she flipped that around. She actually got all of her potions filled. We all were down to 1 wizard left. In the last just few turns of the game, I did manage to get my last wizard in on a turn and end the game immediately. But it was so funny. We were having so much fun, and my daughter was like, I want to play this again, like right now. Can we play it again right now? We're like, actually, we kind of got to get going. But it was just great to see that reaction out of her. So I actually did go ahead and order this. I've played it a couple of times. I never really loved it, but it was a lot of fun with my family. And it's one of those where I think definitely with the right people, it can be a very, very enjoyable experience. So we went ahead and we ordered it. And I did also get some upgraded plastic towers. I'll show you those when those finally come in. They're probably going to be a couple of weeks before those make it here. But that was Wandering Towers. Now, that night, this was Saturday, just 2 days ago, we had a game night planned at the Cask and Stave Speakeasy here in town that I've mentioned a couple times now in the past. The owner of Cask and Stave actually asked me if I'd be interested in trying to host a game night. Obviously, trying to drum up some business for the speakeasy itself, but also, as my wife and I often sit there playing games, it was like, well, why wouldn't we try to get some extra people out here? We play games almost every time that we're here. It'd be great to have some other people playing, some more casual stuff, simple stuff. And so we tried it. We kind of hosted an event. We posted on some social media groups, and one buddy showed up. My friend Chris Mutton came along, had a pizza, had a soda, had a nice time. And he actually brought a game that I had seen at Origins Game Fair just back in June. And this was Sand Art by 25th Century Games. Someone at the booth at Origins quickly explained the game to me, and she made it sound like a roll and write game. And I have no love for roll and write games really at all. And I said, nah, never mind. And I ended up buying Big Sur. So he brought Sand Art, and I saw it sitting there, and I was like, I just have a feeling I'm going to end up playing this game. But hey, this is kind of the perfect environment to play a game like that. It's not a very complicated game. Roll and writes typically aren't really that difficult, and they're over usually generally kind of quick. So I said, okay, sure, let's go ahead and play Sand Art. And I really, really liked it. Sand Art is a game, and as you can kind of tell from the box lid here, is that you're building those little bottles, glass bottles filled with colored sand, right? If you're over the age of probably 35 or so, maybe 30, chances are good that you've done one of these in the past. I don't think they're that big of a thing these days, but I could be wrong. I couldn't remember the last time I've even seen a place to do something like this. I do remember that I did one kind of back in my school days. I had it sitting on a shelf somewhere. It has long since been discarded, I'm sure of it. But the idea here is that you're collecting colors of sand. You've got your 3 primary colors, red, yellow, blue. You can somewhat non-accurately mix them into the orange, purple, and green. Yes, I know that's not really how colored sand works, but that's okay. And then you're going to be pouring those sands into this bottle, which is a colored area or an area of your player sheet that then you color in with these colored pencils. You do all of this using what's called your workbench. And the workbench is a horizontal row of cards on the table that are depicting an action on the top half and the bottom half of every card. You have a little wooden token in the shape of a hand with a thumb, and on your turn, you're going to move your hand token along that workshop in the direction that your thumb is pointing in. You're going to stop on any card that you want to stop on. You get to pick the top side or the bottom side, bottom half or top half, as long as a player is not on that section. So if it's only one hand per area of the workbench. And it's kind of this idea, okay, I'm going to reach over here and I'm going to grab for this. I'm going to reach over here and grab for that. But then you also have to flip over that token. So on the next turn, you're going to have to head back in the opposite direction. And those spaces are going to let you get sand, mix sand, pour sand. There's even a shake the bottle sort of mechanism, which is going to help you spread your sand around. The sands that you collect are tracked on the right side of this player sheet. You've got all these little bottles with little boxes in it, and you're simply checking off those boxes to indicate that you have the sand. Later on, when you pour it, you sort of complete that box. And you can really kind of mark it however it works for you. It tells you to do a single slash when you gain the sand, another slash when you pour the sand, or circle the box when you mix the sand. I don't really know that it matters. I was just kind of using slashes and X's for everything. Each of these spots in the bottle is going to take 1 or 2 units of sand, depending on where you're pouring it. And then in between these sections are little open spaces. You can kind of see, hopefully I can zoom in on these pictures well enough, that you can sort of see that there's a single pip or 2 pips on some of these spaces and no pips in some of these other spaces. So if there are no pips, you can kind of fill in that for free when you have filled an adjacent section with sand. And that's where the game gets maybe a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, especially with the whole shaking mechanism, because when you shake the bottle, you can take an existing color and you can move it into neighboring spaces up to 2 pips worth, but then you can also fill in any of these blank spaces for free, and it just gets a little difficult to explain. I will say that I think we all wrapped our head around it pretty easily after the initial teach. You sort of do it enough times, you kind of start to understand it. Again, I realize that the mixing thing isn't accurate, but for this game, it kind of made sense. Otherwise, you're just going to be constantly going around and taking sand. This kind of gave you some middle actions. Okay, I need to take a whole bunch because I know I want half of it to get mixed into a different color. The hand thing seemed weird at first. I kind of felt like I quickly got the hang of it. My wife said at the end of it that she wasn't really thrilled with that, and I'm also seeing a lot of comments out on Board Game Geek where people are saying that that whole action selection mechanism by moving his hand is weird. I kind of disagree. I was able to kind of plan ahead. Okay, I'm going to go here with the idea that I'm going to go here next. Hopefully no one's blocking it, and if so, maybe I'll just kind of do something else. Initially, I kind of felt like I was tight for time. The whole idea is this game ends when someone fills their bottle. And Chris was ahead of me on just a couple of spaces. I was ahead of my wife by a couple of spaces. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to get left left behind if Chris filled up his bottle first and I couldn't get, the rest of my scoring opportunities. And I haven't really mentioned scoring, but you have these layer cards that you're going to get. I think I may have one picture of the layer cards. And you basically get to pick which side of the bottle it goes on. And if you manage to get 3 edges of your bottle to match the 3 colors on that card, you will score the points on that card. So you're going to see a 3, I think, in this one photo. There was also a 5-point card. I had a couple 5-point cards. I managed to score all of them. Some of them required secondary colors. The coloring on those cards was also really hard to tell the difference between the reds and the oranges. That was kind of one little issue. But I was trying to make sure I was going to get to score those. There are also these pattern cards that come out. We had a island, we had a fish, and we had a tree. And it shows you on the card how the pattern has to look. And if it is colored, then you have to use that appropriate color. And if it shows a gray, as I think the fish card did, then you're actually going to get varying scores based on whether or not you use a primary color or a secondary color to make that fish. And there is also a rule in that the pattern has to be that color, and none of the areas immediately around that pattern can be the same color. So that image has to be distinct, has to be very clear that that is the image. Everything around it has to be a different color in order for it to score. I really enjoyed this. I actually really found it to be a nice, fun little pub game. This was kind of like, the perfect environment for this game. As we were playing it, I thought, oh, my daughter would absolutely love this, getting the color in these little spaces, trying to work on these images. There is a shark card that I saw in the game. She would love getting to, draw a shark. And I just found it very charming. Yes, I think that action selection mechanism might be a little tricky at first. I fell into, an understanding of it very quickly. I think that with a little bit of repetitive play, I think my daughter would have no problem figuring it out. Also, and I've left this out, as you fill the bottles up, as you hit these kind of major rows of the bottle, you unlock extra abilities. And it really does kind of act to speed up the game. And I don't even know that it's entirely necessary. Although as we were playing initially, and I'm like kind of look over, okay, I've taken like 5 turns and I filled up maybe a 10th of my bottle. We may be here a while. But as you fill up that bottle and you hit these sort of bonuses, well, then all of a sudden you start to get extra sand. All of a sudden you get to actually take an extra action. All of a sudden you don't have to flip your hand over anymore. And all of that kind of serves to speed up the game. And I almost wonder, could you maybe just leave out those bonuses as an incremental thing and just play as if you already have all that stuff? It might make the game even quicker. And I don't really think it would change anything as far as, leveling the play up differently for different players. I'm not really sure. But a couple people didn't like that mechanism either. They were kind of saying that, well, especially when you start getting 2 turns, you feel like it takes forever to get to your next turn. And I really didn't feel that way at all. We kind of found, because you're sitting there and you're coloring in these little spaces on this sheet, okay, on my turn, I'm going to move over here. I get to pour some sand. Maybe I'm going to move over here first and get some sand. Then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to pour sand. I go ahead and I mark my couple of things. Okay, you can go ahead and go. I got some coloring to do. And, I'm sitting there, okay, I finally finish. I get it colored in. Maybe I kind of highlight a little thing because I'm a little nitpicky like that. And then I look up, oh, it's my turn again. Oh, sweet. All right, well, let me see, I need some more blue, and I'm going to do a shake action. Okay, go ahead. And I got to sit here and mark all my stuff. As long as you don't forget what you're doing. We were actually overlapping our turns very, very efficiently, and the game kind of flew by. Again, once we understood how these sort of weird areas and such, sort of get filled in on the player sheet. So anyways, I had quite a lot of fun with sand art, and I'm going to try and I think grab a copy of this as well. The last game that we played that night after a very, very busy Saturday was we played a quick game of Tacta. I've talked about this one a bunch. I really won't get into it, but played a 3-player game on the nice restaurant table here. And again, just a great game to either kick off a night with or wrap up a night with. Very, very easy to teach. You get to do a little bit of smack talking. There's a little bit of take that in this game. And I actually saw some really, really tight scores. I think it was 48 to 50 and 51 in our game of Tacta. All right, I'm still not done yet. On Sunday, after we slept in a little bit from a late Saturday night, my wife and I played Pursuit of Happiness, the Big Box Edition. Now, I talked about this just in episode, I think it was 75, after the Dice Tower Retreat, the 75 and a half. It may have been that one. This is a life simulator game. I talked a bunch in the past about adulthood. This is a game along that same vein, but plays fairly differently. Here, you are basically putting out these time tokens as a worker placement type style, worker placement mechanism. You're drafting cards on this large mat. What is interesting is that I played this at the Dice Tower Retreat on the original version, the one that was from Stronghold Games. This is from Artipia Games. And again, this is the big box edition. And I was really surprised that they changed some rules in this game, because in the original version, you only had so many cards out in this display and sort of like the market of cards to choose from equal to the number of players. And so I was quite nervous that in a 2-player game, we were going to be really strapped for options. Okay, I'm really looking for a particular type of card. I need something that's going to give me this type of resource, but I've only got 2 to choose from, and that's going to be a challenge. But in this version, as much as I can tell, I read through the rules several times, you just fill up that display. And in the previous version, there was actually, 2 players, 3 players, and 4 players printed on that mat or on the board. And that doesn't exist in this version of the game. Now, the trade-off of that, and my buddy Omar Hernandez, who sort of mentioned this game to me and encouraged me to check it out, did tell me that with the expansions, with this big box edition, there is a ton of options. There's a ton of cards to choose from. And he was not wrong. We had, I think, at any given point, I'm trying to do some quick math in my head, probably 37, if not more, cards to choose from on our turn. And that was cards on the market, not including any cards that we already had in play in front of us. And so there were several times, even just with my wife and I, that we were just sitting there sort of staring over all these options. What am I going to go with? I really, really need this resource. What's the most efficient way to get as much of it as I possibly can? And that was understandably a slow process to just sort of math through all those options. The other thing I'll say, and like I said, I'm not going to get really deep into the weeds on this. You can go and check out the previous episodes where I talked about it. But I realized as we were playing, we were kind of coming through in those last couple of rounds, and my wife and I have been neck and neck in score the entire time. And I suddenly realized that I had left out these lifetime goal cards. I think it was called I think it was just a life goal is what it's called. And they are in-game scoring cards. Now, they're listed in the modules of the big box expansion as an extra version of these cards. And I just forgot that they were also in the base game. I thought, okay, well, I've already introduced a ton of modules in this. I'm not going to add all this extra stuff because it's going to overload my wife and me, as it would turn out. And so I didn't put them out. And then later on in the game, I realized, oh no, we're actually still supposed to have those even for the base game. So we didn't have any real end-game scoring out of this, which kind of lopsided the results a little bit for us. But I think on the same token, if we had been trying to puzzle through everything that we had and manage, I think, 2 or 3 different end-game goals, I think 2 for a 2-player game, it might have just sort of stepped over that line into being simply too much. So I'm bummed that I messed that up. But on the same token, I don't think it was the worst thing that we could have gotten through. The biggest surprise I had in this is that there is a stress track in the game, and if you fall off the end of the stress track, you die, and you're out of the game. And if that happens at the end of the round or the middle of the round, regardless, you're immediately done with the game. Now, as the game progresses into the last 3 rounds, the game itself will deal you stress because you're just getting old, and the sort of counteraction of that is, or I should say the result of that is that you have less actions available to you in those last couple of rounds, and eventually the game itself will literally kill you. The only way that you can mitigate that is to gain health throughout the game. And if you can improve your health, then you can withstand a little bit more of that stress before the game kills you. In the 3-player game, I played this at the retreat with my friend Liz and Eric. We saw 2 of those cards, and Liz got one and I got one, and we used it to survive 1 extra round, and Eric had died off early and just kind of had to watch this. It wasn't a big deal. We only got 4 turns each, and we played it fairly quickly, and so it wasn't like he had to sit there for a long time and wait for us. In this game, between my wife and I, we only saw 1 of those cards. Even with having more market options available to us than we did, than I did at the retreat, and even with having, more types of cards to choose from, I still only saw 1 card in the entire game that generated this life icon and, gave me a little extension to the game. And I was really kind of hoping that we were going to see a lot more of that. And I mean, a lot more is what I was hoping for. in this expansion. And it's one of those things where it just kind of felt unfair because with the fact that we had been so tight on score, I drafted the one card that gave me one extra round, that gave me just a couple of options to pick up some extra points, and essentially gave me the game. Now, again, we didn't have the life gold cards. I kind of goofed that up. But it was almost like I was kind of guaranteed to win just because of the fact that I was able to draft the one card that gave me an extra round in the game. So I was a little disappointed in that. But we did enjoy it. I think that I could probably work in a couple of those extra modules. I don't think they certainly add more choices, more things to manage. But again, like, it's one of those games where you just cannot do everything that there is to do. And it's really just a matter of, okay, where can I find the most points to, succeed at this game? But that was Pursuit of Happiness. I am glad I picked that one up, and I'm hoping it won't spend too long off the table. The last game that we played last night, the daughter had wanted to play this ever since we were at the Unplugged Games Cafe, and the table that was playing Wandering Towers then played this, and she was really bummed that she wasn't getting to play it. We played Let's Go to Japan. Now, I've talked about this, I think, several times in the Ratchet. It's been a while since I've talked about it, but this is a tableau building game. You're drafting cards from two major decks, one from Tokyo, one from Kyoto, and you're playing them into your calendar. You have a calendar board in front of you with 5 days or 6 days of the week, and there is an expansion that adds the 7th day. And you're simply trying to get things done each day that correlates to a theme for that day, which is chosen during setup. And is somewhat universal for every player, although, again, one of the expansions lets you kind of change it just a little bit. And so you may determine in the setup that, okay, Wednesday is going to be food day. So you want to try and draw as many cards and get food cards into that Wednesday as you possibly can. When you finish a day with 3 cards, you're going to generate some bonuses. And those bonuses may let you draw extra cards and kind of have some extra options to choose from. You may be able to draw wild tokens, which are going to help you for scoring at the end of the game, etc., 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 etc. Just a delightful game. And I was talking to my buddy Chris over the weekend, and he was like, this didn't click with me at all. This wasn't very fun. My daughter absolutely loves this game. We love playing it with her. We also sort of do a thing at the end of the game. You're supposed to just on your own resolve each of your days, tally up your score. But that's very boring. And so the way that we played is we actually kind of tell our story. Hey, I went and I saw this. I went and I did that. And this token's going to stress me out because I spent a little bit too much money, or maybe I was a little overwhelmed. There were so many people there. And you kind of get to create that emergent story. And that's one part of it I really enjoy. I do feel like there's a theme here to it, even if generally the theme is make a plan. And it's really only at the end of the game that you kind of score that plan. But for us, we turn that plan into a story. Okay, here's what I'm actually going to do on my trip. And it's just a little bit more involved, a little bit more fun. It adds a little bit more time. I think we did that once in a 5-player game. And it was like, oh my God, are we ever going to finish this? But for the 3 of us, it's totally fine. And with this, we got to add in all of the little expansions. There's a passport expansion. There's a day trip expansion, which adds that 7th day, and just a slightly different scoring criteria for one of those days. And we just had a lot of fun with this. My wife and I both set some high scores for ourselves, especially with that passport tile, which just kind of gives you a unique ability to use during the game. Anyways, Let's Go to Japan. And I don't know if I mentioned it yet here on the Ratchet, but they're coming out with a new version of this. They're coming out with the next sort of edition, and it's Let's Go to France. And I am extremely excited for that because my daughter has always wanted to go to Japan. I have always wanted to go to France, and I'm looking forward to checking that out. That is it for the recently played games segment. Okay, real quick question for next week. I already kind of mentioned this. Maybe you have an idea where this is going. Here's the question. Have you ever played a board game only to realize when you're almost finished that you've been playing it completely wrong? Ever happened to you? I don't know. I can think of at least once that it's happened to me. Folks, that is it for episode number 77. Thank you for tuning in. As always, thank you for your comments and your participation. I hope to hear from all of you and more of you and many of you very soon. And we will chat then. Cheers.